The Knowledgeable Provider podcast is intended primarily to entertain, also to inform, but it is not a substitute for actual medical training and should not be used by anyone to diagnose or treat any medical condition in themselves or others. If you need medical advice, please make an appointment to see your own knowledgeable medical provider. The opinions expressed by me and anyone else who happens to appear on the podcast are solely those of the people expressing them and are not necessarily representative of any other entities. Other than the lunches at the office, I do not receive any sort of compensation from pharmaceutical or medical device companies, and I have no other relevant financial disclosures. Look, this is all for fun, okay? Don't sue me. All right, on with the show. Hello, welcome back to Knowledgeable Provider. I'm your host, Jody Marks. I have such a great conversation to share with you today. Recently, I had the chance to interview Dr. Todd Oyen, who was one of my paramedic instructors back at Northwest Shoals Community College, where he still teaches today. Of all the teachers I've had in my educational career, he always stood out as, I thought, one of the most effective. So I wanted to touch base with him now 24 years after I first started his class as a student to see what he has learned in the interim. At this point, he has not only a lot of knowledge about medicine, but a lot of knowledge about teaching and education and how to reach students. And I do teach a little bit on the side, but I think even people who don't teach formally in medicine are going to be called on to teach somebody something at some point, right? We teach family members things, we teach patients things, we teach each other things. There are always students around, pretty much whatever setting you're in, or people who are orienting new employees. You're going to have to teach somebody something at some point. So whether education is your passion or not, if you work in medicine, I think it's good to put at least a little bit of thought into how you're going to deal with students and be more effective as a teacher. I think I would have to split this episode into two parts in order to completely read Dr. Oyen's CV. It's unbelievable, but I'll just hit the high points. Dr. Oyen holds a Doctorate of Health Sciences degree from A.T. Still University, Master's in Education from UAB, a bachelor's degree or maybe a few bachelor's degrees from University of North Alabama. He majored in biology and chemistry and industrial hygiene and minored in mathematics, became a paramedic in 1992 and worked in the field for several years before getting into education. He has worked for several different ambulance services around this area and also in the Atlanta area and also in Middleton, Wisconsin. In addition to teaching at Northwest Shoals, he also teaches in the Department of Kinesiology at UNA. I think he has about every certification you can possibly have within the EMS realm. It would be interesting to make him sit down and put all the possible letters he could use behind his name and see how long that took. He is also a Tang Soo Do master. I believe he is a 5th degree black belt and does a lot of teaching in that area as well. He is active in scouting as a scoutmaster and cub master, and he himself is an Eagle Scout. So maybe one of the most accomplished people I've ever met. It was an honor and a pleasure to sit down and talk with him, and just a little glimpse of the future here. I think we ended up talking for about 5 hours, so you're going to be hearing Dr. Todd Oyen's voice on this podcast several times in the months ahead. So here you go. Hope you enjoy our first conversation. Dr. Todd Oyen, welcome to Knowledgeable Provider. I really appreciate you doing this. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. I've been a little nervous about it, but I'm excited to be here. Quite an honor.
It's an honor for me to have you. You're one of the most influential people in my career, really, as far as being an instructor and a role model. You're really amazing.
I think you give me a little bit too much credit there.
I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. But no, I was thinking about that. Like, I've had a lot of teachers, and the teachers I had here were some of the most effective, and you right at the top of the heap teachers that I've ever had.
Well, thank you, because that was fairly early in my career, and I don't know if I was as good a teacher or I didn't know as much about teaching as I do now.
Sure.
So I feel a little bit for some of those first classes.
When I was looking at your CV, that's the first time I realized that was the beginning of your educational career.
Yes.
I didn't realize you were a new teacher.
Okay. Well, I guess I did a good job of hiding that part, faking it till I made it.
You're amazing then. So now you must just like look at the students and just beam the information directly into them with no speaking necessary.
I wish.
You know, I teach in the nursing department a little bit at Calhoun, and I'm not a real teacher. Like, I don't have any, formal training on education, but when I try to figure out how to lecture and how to teach, I just sort of try to channel you and Brett McGill.
Brett's awesome.
Yes. And everybody here, Mark Simpson, Mark Brannon, who else was here? Brandon King, Butch Tucker, Dr. Solis, Rick Solis.
Oh, yes.
I had an amazing group of people to learn from.
We had a great group. We still have a great group, but that was for little old Northwest Shoals, that was an amazing group of people that we had here.
Yeah, I agree. I feel very lucky that I got the opportunity to learn from all of you.
I think Brett had a lot to do with that because he pulled in people who used to teach at Huntsville and just the group that we had working together, because most of us worked together at the time on the ambulance service. Brett and I both saw the position for the program director here advertised, and I had put in for it, and we had to have references. So I went to him because I knew he taught it at Huntsville and asked if he would be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. And he said, well, I would, but I put in for that position too. And I said, well, that's fine. Write whatever letter you feel. And he wrote his letter for me, and it gets submitted and all that. And he got the position, which with his background and his experience, I knew I wasn't going to get it. But then he turned around and hired me almost immediately afterwards. So I felt pretty honored by that.
I've learned in my career a lot of times it is about who you know.
Yes.
I guess all of you pretty much worked at Athens.
Yes.
So I remember hearing all these stories about Athens, and I'm like, man, y'all got it going on in Athens, man. All this crazy stuff happens in Athens.
I mean, there's a lot of things that happen that you wouldn't have expected for being kind of a smaller town at the time, but they really had an awesome ambulance service. I think they still do. I'm not in it there now. I don't know the day-to-day anymore, but when we were there, it was top-notch. It was about the best place to work.
So we're here kind of to talk about education and what you learned about teaching and how you deal with students. And I'm kind of on that journey myself of trying to figure out how to be more effective with the students, because it's not how I thought it would be. It's not intuitive, you know. Let's just start at the beginning. How did you get into the EMS field to begin with?
A girl. Okay. That was an interesting experience. I was dating, I'll say a girl because we were both young at the time, but a young lady, a young woman, and her father was a Secret Service agent. And that's what made that really kind of interesting. You know, you always worry about the intimidation of the father. Well, I didn't have any worry. It was intimidating.
He's right behind you. That's like what's the movie, the Meet the Fockers?
Yeah. But he apparently took a liking to me, which was good. But he knew my interest in medicine, and I wanted to go to med school. So he was good friends with the mayor of the community, which was Middleton, Wisconsin. So he got me on to do some rides with the ambulance service there, and I absolutely loved it. So when I turned, I guess I was 16 at the time, but right after that, doing a couple of rides, I thought this is what I want to do. So I joined them. Started as a third on the ambulance. We were volunteer service. And then as soon as I could get my EVOC certificate, I became an official licensed ambulance driver. And I wish I still had that old license saying ambulance driver, because I know that's kind of a derogatory term to a lot of EMS providers nowadays, but I officially was one.
I was also, and same thing. I started really young, and I thought that was really unique at the time. But the more people I talk to, the more people do get into it. I realize when they're teenagers, like gets its hooks in you early.
It does. Yeah. It does. I think you had talked about it in a previous podcast. I worked a lot of Friday and Saturday nights, so there was many times where people from my high school were like out partying or whatever, and I would pick them up. And then like Monday morning, I'd be sitting in class thinking, yep, I know where you were Friday night and what you took. It was interesting. And I came from a big school, so for the most part, I could not interact with those that I had picked up with much, but every once in a while.
How long did you work in the field before you transitioned into education?
So I started, it would have been 86, 87 with that ambulance driver. I became a CPR instructor in 90. And then when I was working at Athens, I started teaching in the education department there, doing the CPR, ACLS, ITLS, all those alphabet courses. And then it was probably 99 that I started here, but I was adjunct to begin with. And they'd brought me in to teach some of the EMT and intermediate classes back then, but also to develop the training center. That was something that Brett wanted for us to have our training center here through American Heart. So he had brought me in to teach that or set that up. And I went full-time in, I think, 2007. So I've been teaching here for 16, 17 years full-time, and then a good 7 or 8 years prior to that as an adjunct.
What drew you into education from the field?
I've always enjoyed the teaching part of it, which is funny because I, at one point, had gotten an award for being the quietest student in school. But I found I could teach. If I understand a topic well enough, I'm comfortable in front of a classroom where you get me in a group of like 4 or 5 people, and I tend to be very quiet, a bit of an introvert. But teaching was different. And I going into EMS, as much as I love the job and I love taking care of patients, I knew at some point I would get a little old to be doing the job because it's a fairly physical job. And I had worked with some people that were in their 50s and 60s and even pushing 70 that were just having a hard time doing the actual job. So I wanted something that was going to be a bit of an exit strategy, but I didn't want to leave EMS. And there's not a lot of upward mobility as far as like management. So I thought education would be a fun one. So I guess the time I started here, I started working on my master's in education.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm sure you helped a lot of people working in the field, but I know you've helped a lot of people doing this as well.
That was an unexpected thing. And in EMS or in education in general, they sometimes call it a bit of a web. So I have former students that have gone on to be physicians and run ambulance services now. I have one that runs a stroke organization, one that runs an airway management company that does advanced airway training for EMS and even for emergency department and physicians. It's kind of neat to see your students, because kind of like your children, you always want them to do better than you, and how many of them have. And then in essence, the lives I've touched through education and they've touched through their classes and just how many people we all get interconnected with.
We can talk about some more specifics later on, but just in general, like, can you just talk about your philosophy of education and how that's evolved over the years, and what have you learned from teaching?
When I first started teaching, I didn't realize what an art, I guess, teaching is. I kind of felt like I knew the EMS and the paramedicine side of things fairly well, and I just figured you just came into the classroom and talked about it, and that would be sufficient. But there's a whole body of knowledge for just education, and I guess about the same time, EMS, when we first started, we were we think this is right, but we didn't have a lot of evidence-based medicine for us in the field. And there's not a lot of evidence-based education. And I want to say over the last 10 or 15 years, that has probably expanded exponentially. So a lot of growth in that. So we are now seeing things that are proven to improve education, improve learning. So trying to adopt some of those things is much different than the old me stand up front with, back in the day, overhead projectors or slide carousels, teaching with those where we basically lectured to the students and the students took the notes. And then at a certain point, you took a test. One of the things that has always been fun about EMS is we have so many skills. So there was always a sort of a split in the class where you would lecture for a while and then we could go do something hands-on. And I think that helped. Today, we much more understand about active learning and how the student really needs to be involved and engaged, and things like reading your textbook is okay, but it really should be a reference. That's not a great way to learn. So my advice, the old days about making sure you read the book and reread the book, that was probably poor advice. And just how they have to be engaged. And even taking notes is an okay method, but maybe not some of the best methods. So changing how I teach to try to adapt to more active learning and engaged learning is what I'm trying to do. And having to study and learn and get up to date on all of, not just the medicine, but up to date on all the learning techniques. It's like 2 full-time jobs sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
I have many, many times said I wish I had not gotten a minor in math, but a major in math and taught math, because math hasn't changed a whole lot. I know that's not true. There's development in math, but I really think that for most of my math classes, they probably hadn't updated their notes in 50 years, where every semester we have to bring ours up to date with the latest medicine.
Yeah, I catch myself at Calhoun all the time. If I'm lazy and don't update a presentation, I'll be right in the middle of saying it and go, "Oh, that's wrong. No, that's not right anymore." Even just from one year to the next.
Yes.
What have you learned about just interacting with the students, dealing with the students? That's one thing that I probably struggle with more than anything. I guess I was expecting that people would contact me and be like, "Can you explain, ICP more? Can you clarify this?" But it's not that at all. It's, what do I do? How do I study? Like, help me. What do you say to people in those situations?
So there's a couple of different things. I think like when you were coming through class, there was a different mentality of our EMS students. And I don't know if it's because there was more close connections to EMS. They either had family, a parent or somebody in it, or what the deal was. But I know from my paramedic class, when I went through school, we lived, breathed, ate the stuff. If we weren't in class, we were together at a study session, and we would meet before class for breakfast and study and quiz each other. And I just don't see that same connected within the classes now.
Really?
I think our students, they come in, and if they can get here in time, great. If not, they get here when they can. And then as soon as class is done, they all get in their cars and they leave. If I can get them to set up like a text group to talk to each other, that's about as far as it goes.
Really?
And that has been something that's really hard to kind of overcome, because I think a lot of learning is rehashing and recalling and thinking back. We call it that metacognition stuff. You learn about learning and think about your learning, that we tended to do like after class. Was the Biscuit Village still?
I remember Biscuit Village, yes.
So that was a very common thing, especially with the night class, because that place was open 24/7 and right next to the recording studio. You just never knew who was going to be there.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
So there was a lot of times that after class, the class would go down there and they'd eat a little bit and talk about class and refresh and rehash. And I think that was good. So it's, in some respects, a little bit harder now to reach the students and trying to give them learning ideas and how to study, because many of them make it through school without a whole lot of effort. And I don't want to speak poorly of any of the K through 12 because I know they work their tails off. But I've had several students recently that have made it to my class that don't know how to read.
Literally don't know how to read?
Literally do not know how to read. Yeah. And they graduated high school.
Yeah.
So I wonder how some of them slipped through, but I think there just doesn't seem to be quite as much effort involved on the students' part to get there. So when they hit EMT, it's like 1,600 pages in 16 weeks and a lot of material, and basically anything in the realm of medicine is fair game. And so they don't really know how to approach that and study that. So trying to get them to do more of the recall things, to try to come up with flashcards and not just learn a term, but then have to learn how to apply that to a scenario. And case-based learning and simulations seem to be becoming the background of it. And then when they're on their own, doing a lot of individual quizzing. I use a lot of Kahoot, and I send my Kahoots out to my students. We have adopted some of our textbooks, they're e-text, but then also their learning management programs. And basically, for each chapter, they take like 100 question quizzes. It's broken up into a pre-test, post-test, and chapter test. But seeing those test questions, because you see the question, and then you have to stop and think about what the answer is. And that having to think through your thoughts helps learning. So trying to get students to do that, or to create their own, or to get together some and give each other's questions. So those are things that I try to tell my students to do at the beginning. I try to encourage the whole growth mindset things. The story I tell, when I went through high school, my senior year in high school, I had some electives. I had to fill some time, so I took a psychology class. I thought that would be interesting. And we, at the end of it, took an IQ test. And because that was a real big thing in the 80s, IQ, and everybody knew their IQ and all that. And after the testing process, it was several days, sat down with the teacher, and she was like, well, we need to discuss this. First of all, did you take this seriously? I thought, well, yes, I tried. She's like, are you sure? And of course, then I'm starting to get a little nervous. And it turned out that according to this testing thing, I had an IQ of 80.
All right.
Which puts me just a wee bit above being mentally incompetent, which I thought about going back and doing again, because then if somebody ever made me mad, I could slap them across the face. And when they took me to court, I could say, well, I'm too dumb to know better. I'm mentally incompetent. According to my IQ test. And of course, we know nowadays that IQ tests are very unreliable, and they are definitely not a predictor of success. So I finished my last program with a 4.0. So obviously that did correlate to success. So trying to tell my students that they're going to come in here. It's going to be a little overwhelming at first. They're going to struggle some. We're going to run some simulations. They're going to kill some mannequins, but it's all okay. It's all a learning experience, and they can do it if they're willing to put forth the effort. As long as they're willing to realize that they're going to make mistakes, things are going to go badly some days, and just learn from it. It's not a personal thing. It's just we go through these things to learn.
You, I think, at least from my experience with you, have a very calming, reassuring kind of presence. I always appreciated that about you as a student. I'm sure that's much appreciated still.
I don't know. I've been told that a lot, but I don't know what I really do to be a calming person.
I bet it's nothing you do actively. I think it's just your personality. You just have a very chill vibe, very it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. Because I know our students freak out. They get so anxious. One thing we started doing before the test is just the lead instructor will play this guided meditation kind of thing. It's just like a nice calming voice, just trying to calm everybody down. Do you see that with your medic students also, EMT and medic students?
Oh, yes. And I try to use that as a learning opportunity. So box breathing, where you breathe in for the 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, going through that box breathing, because that's something we should be doing whenever the tones drop or go off and then we get a page, we got to go on a call. We should be doing that slow, deep breathing to try to relax so we're a little less stressed, because we know what happens when we get stressed. I think it was out of Memphis, and this was many, many years ago that I read the study, so I can't quote it exactly, but they did a study where they took half the high school or whatever and taught them box breathing, and the other half they didn't, and they would do a couple minutes of breathing before every test, and the group that did the breathing scored significantly higher on the test. So I try to encourage them to do that and take a few moments. I don't get as fancy as putting in some meditation music, but maybe that's something I'll take away from you and start doing.
I don't know if it helps or not, but it helps me. Just when I'm sitting in the classroom, I'm always like, oh, this is lovely, maybe this is not a fair question. You don't have to answer it, but the EMTs and medics that you're turning out now, how do you feel like those people compare to when you first started 20 years ago?
That it's a really hard comparison because, my EMT book was like 20 pages long, but it was on stone tablets. So that was a lot to carry. But now, just what we know about EMS and what even EMTs and definitely advanced EMTs, which used to be intermediates, but don't ever call them intermediates because that's an evil term now.
Is it?
Well, it was dropped because that wasn't anything useful, though we thought it was, but then it was brought back about 5 years later. We just called it advanced. But anyways, I look at the things even like 12 leads. That was something that when I went through paramedic school, we had heard about, but we didn't do in the field.
Okay.
If you wanted to be a really nerdy paramedic, you learned how to move the one lead around with your 4 lead or 3 lead. We didn't even have a 4 lead.
Really?
With our 3 lead to try to get a 12 lead. And you had to print out each one and then look at each of those 10 printouts or 12 printouts and
holy crap.
And try to guess from there.
Wow.
So there's just a whole lot more to learn. So that's part of it. So it's kind of hard to compare the two. I just don't see I don't want to say drive because I know they have drives, but maybe interest. Now, we didn't have the internet because I would have really been lost then, but we had like Gems magazine. But I remember like really excited when that came in the mailbox and reading it. And then EMS One started another magazine. So everybody subscribed to that and we all would read the articles. We'd talk about them. But anything we get our hands on, we studied and learned. If we had YouTube and Instagram and being able to search stuff online back in the day, I would have been like at my computer 24/7 learning about EMS. And I just don't think we have that today. And I don't know if it's a better balance or a worse balance. Because I will say I was like 100% EMS. I lived, breathed, read everything EMS. It was all EMS. So I don't know if I was maybe as well balanced as I should have been for a while. But on the flip side, if I'm going to go to school and go through a program, I want to learn everything I can about it. And I find it frustrating that I'll find an article that's very related to something we just talked about, and I'll put it in our learning management system, and then I'll go back and look a couple of weeks later to see if anybody looked at it, and nobody did. Like, well, I took the effort to put it in there. You would think they would want to look at that, and they don't. Or I'll talk about current topics in EMS, and they just have not a lot of interest in it. So I think the desire to help people is still there. I don't know how to create that desire to learn all you can about EMS.
Are most of your students like traditional, like right out of high school age, or do you have all over the place?
So we have 3 basic groups. A lot of it is dual enrollment now. So we have people in high school that are taking classes. And those are some of our worst and some of our best students. So the ones that wanted to do it, they're amazing. But then a lot of times the school will have somebody that they're having a hard time fitting anywhere else. So they'll just put them in the EMT class. And that's a really tough class if you're not really motivated. So those students are like, well, I was just put here. I don't even want to do this. So they struggle a lot. So they're nothing against them personally. They're just not a good fit for that class. So they don't do well. You put me in like a cosmetology class, I'm pretty sure I would not do well. Then we do get a few that are straight out of high school or recently out of high school. And then we tend to get an older group. And that tends to be somebody looking for a career change, although I don't see as many of those as we used to. Or somebody who's just reached a point in their life where they just want to kind of help out with their fire department a little bit, so they want to take EMT. I think most of our paramedics tend to be younger, but they've probably done it for a few years as an EMT or advanced EMT, and they just want to go up to that next level so they can do more and make more.
Do you have a lot that goes straight through basic to paramedic?
We do have some. And Registry had put out a study a few years ago to show that those students that went straight through actually did a little bit better on passing Registry first time, which was kind of surprising. You would have thought the experience, but most everybody feels they want to work in the field a little bit before they get to paramedic. And personally, I think that probably is helpful to them as long as they don't pick up bad habits.
Yes, I would agree with that. I don't know if you can draw a parallel to nursing world, but I think the general consensus is it's kind of scary to go straight through from not being a nurse to being a practitioner or having a doctorate in nursing. And that the nursing programs kind of push you to do that. You know, they want you to stay there and keep getting your degrees. But I'm only speaking for myself. I don't know if practitioner education really is good enough to do that. I think you need the clinical experience.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can learn in the classroom, and even in simulations, there's only so much you can learn compared to dealing with patients day in, day out.
Yeah, definitely. Compared to when you were working in the field versus when you moved into education, how did your view of the whole EMS field change?
Some of this comes from age, just a different perspective now. I've always enjoyed the medical calls more than the trauma calls because I like the detective work that required, and having to think and question and not just like, oh, there's red stuff, so let me put a bandage on it. And that limb doesn't look right, so I'm going to put a splint on that. And of course, when I came through with trauma care, everybody was C-spined. Everybody had mask pants. Everybody had bilateral IVs, and we drove past the hospital. So it was pretty simple care. You stubbed your toe, it was the same thing. But just the body of knowledge and what we have to learn, that has definitely changed. And I think that's going back to where that experience is probably more important now, maybe even than when I did it, because there's a whole lot more that we can do, and just seeing how the field has evolved and changed. And I'm excited about that. I look forward to some of the things that might be coming someday.
Anything in particular?
Well, I was real excited when we got 12 leads, because in the field to be able to go, yep, you're having a STEMI, I think you're having a heart attack, we're going to take you to the right hospital, was, for somebody who didn't have that at the beginning of his career, was just amazing. Flip side, sometimes we get a little technology. So we were very aware of our assessment skills. And that's something that I wish students would learn better, is just how to assess a patient. I had a woman recently that said she was having some abdominal pain. She was pointing to her epigastric region, but she had that gray look. It was actually, I was doing first aid at a martial arts event, and she's like, oh, I've been having this for a few days, so now I'm starting to get more red flags. And she was a probably 60-year-old female. So then you start thinking about those that, older don't feel the chest pain as much, and females don't feel the chest pain as much. And it was just all like, I'm not liking this at all. So I made the call to call 911 and get her to the hospital, and turned out she had got 3 stents like 45 minutes later.
Wow.
But a lot of that, I mean, I was first aid, so I didn't have any of the technology stuff, but I liked seeing the 12 leads. That was a big one. I'm really excited about what we could do with ultrasound.
Yes.
I think that has some great potential now that it's gotten much smaller and much more portable. As far as the airway stuff, this is terrible, but I know we have all the video guided things, but from somebody who intubated so many people before those, I'm having a hard time adjusting. So I'm just an old dinosaur that way. I still like direct laryngoscopy. The video stuff I know is better, and it's nice being able to record it, and it's good for documentation. Documentation, speaking of that, going from paper and then the old bubbles to all the EPCRs now, as much as we fuss about 156 fields or whatever we have to fill out, I think that has some great potential. CAT scan is one that's interested me, but I don't know if that's going to be able to really, short of strokes. And I think we can, with our stroke assessments, we can get pretty close and get them to the stroke center anyways. So I don't know if having a CAT scan is going to help us that much. I like the critical care paramedic idea. I really like the idea of a community paramedic that does much more home health.
Yes, me too.
Then we start crossing into nursing though, and they have their own home health. But I guess there's a gap or a window when somebody first gets diagnosed or first gets discharged from the hospital before they can pick up home health. I think we can fill the role there. But being able to pull up on a scene, draw some blood, run it through whatever machine of the year is that tells us our lab values, and then being able to interpret that I think has a great potential.
I love the idea of, the people who their name because they call 911 every day. I really love the idea of just sending somebody to check on them.
Yes.
Every week or every 3. How are you? What can we do for you? Surely that's better for them and for the system.
Yes. So thinking about how I've changed my approach to it, I was probably much more of I was always fairly aggressive and fairly thorough. I think I was. I've worked with a lot of partners that would fuss that I cracked the drug box way too much. But I felt like if there was something I could do for the patient to make him better, I would. Now, I also have probably gotten a little more cautious of giving medications because it's really hard to suck them back out of somebody. But I also think with experience, I've gotten much more confident about which medication to give for which situations, and which patient can probably wait until we get to the hospital. But if I can make things easier on the nurses in the ER or emergency department, I'm going to make it easier for the patient in general. I know we've gotten a little bit of pushback lately about IVs because most field sticks had to be replaced in the ER, and then most emergency department sticks had to be replaced when they go to the floor. So I'm a little concerned that we're getting our patients stuck too many times. If I can start the saline lock and have it there so the nurse doesn't have to do it later, I've just made things easier for everybody. So trying to do that and trying to do a thorough assessment on the patient so I can give them a heads up on what concerns me at least. I like to think I've always been a pretty thorough medic. Don't know if I always was, but definitely as I've gotten older, I've gotten more into that.
I don't think I ever got the chance to work with you in the field or do a rotation with you or anything, but I have a really hard time imagining you being not thorough.
Starting in Wisconsin, in Middleton, we were pretty thorough on scene. There was not the whole mentality of, I'm just going to put him in the ambulance and do everything and route to the hospital. None of us had that. And I don't know if it's just a different ambulance service culture. but we usually had 2 sets of vital signs before we left the scene. We got the initial one, but we always had our roles. So we had the team leader who was going to do the questioning, the assessment, and then usually the third person was going to be getting vital signs and putting them on the monitor, and then the driver was the one that handled the stretcher. So we all kind of had a role, and it was, I think, fairly efficient. But we would get a lot of information and do a lot of stuff on scene before we even transported. And we had some good, sometimes 45 minutes, hour and a half transport times. And then working in Atlanta, that carried over to that. And then when I came here, it was a different culture. There was much more of the, you call, we haul, just put them in the ambulance, I'll do it en route if I'm going to do it at all. And nothing against the medics here. It's just a different way of doing it. Because really, truly, there's not a lot of things we're going to fix in the field. There's a few things, hypoglycemia, an asthma attack maybe. But most of the patients need to end up in the emergency department. And if we're delaying too long, then that can cause problems too. It's a fine line, I guess, between spending too much time on scene.
You're right. That is a fine line to walk when you're out working. Like, is what I'm doing for the patient, or is it for me?
Yes.
Is it just because I want to start 2 IVs and do this procedure, or should I really just take the patient to the hospital? You kind of alluded to the culture, and that's a fascinating part of working in medicine, whether it's nursing or EMS or whatever. Is like the dynamic between team members and how that affects what you do and the culture of where you are. Like I've worked at one ambulance service where they have excellence in their logo, their official company logo. But in my time there was no excellence. It was just awful. And it was very much like, we'd show up eventually. They didn't care. As long as you eventually showed up to the call, they didn't care where you were. They didn't care what you were doing. They didn't care what you looked like. They didn't get you equipment. I mean, it was a nightmare. You call an ambulance, we'd show up eventually. Maybe we'd bring the stretcher in if we felt like it, like just that kind of just lazy,
Yep.
And no backing and no oversight. I mean, it was fun working there, as a 21-year-old medic, whatever, but just dismal as far as patient care. And then moved to HIMSI, the second ambulance service I worked at, and it was, night and day. Like,
oh yes,
they have their issues, but I mean, overall, they expect excellent standards over there. I've always been the same person, but being in that culture, I know I did a lot better job than when I worked in the previous culture, just because of who was around me and what the expectation was. You were kind of talking about people giving you crap for, trying to do too much or open the drug vial. And it's working with somebody like that who's just lazy, who just doesn't want to do anything. Like, oh, it brings you down.
It does.
And it's never like they're concerned about the patient. It's they don't want to do the paperwork of replacing the meds, or they don't want to make the extra trip to the station. It's that crap.
I'll admit that was always a bit of a pain, getting some of the medication boxes and all that replaced.
Yep.
Because that took usually a good 30 minutes. And when it's like 3:00 in the morning, I'm like, I could have been asleep, but that guy probably needed that morphine, or that guy needed the nitro. And now here we are.
It always kind of made me sad or disappointed to see medics, especially, and I guess this is probably true of any other discipline too, but people who just got to the point where they were like, we don't care. We're not doing anything. I'm going to throw you in the ambulance and we're going to the hospital. I don't care what's wrong with you. Back in paper ticket days, we would go into the business office at HIMSI and they pay us to come in and just key the tickets into the computer.
Wow.
And so we got to, you kind of got an overview of what your coworkers were doing just by reading their documentation. And I would sit there in that seat and just fume because I'd be, typing this and I'm going to go, oh, they're going to do this. They're going to do this procedure. And they, you can tell they just went, nah. And I used to think, oh, we had an opportunity to intervene here. We had an opportunity to do that. Why didn't you do anything? And, I know you can't Monday morning quarterback somebody just from reading their ticket, I guess. But yeah, I feel that.
I think that's worse as a teacher.
Okay.
Because I feel like I tried to instill a certain ethic and culture in my students, and then they get out there and they meet a different culture. And when it's a new EMT or a new paramedic going into a service that maybe doesn't have a very high expectation or doesn't have a high excellence for their culture, and just see them basically get broken. I run into them 6 months later and they're like, yeah, I had this guy, he broke his arm. I just put him in the truck and took him to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
How about the splint? It wasn't that bad. You give me anything for pain? Nah, I didn't want to break the seals. Okay. And it that hurts me a little bit. I had a call, and I don't want to share too many war stories, and I think this person is still around. But I'd worked at Athens for a while, and I left Athens and came here, and for a little while I was not working, maybe like 6 months between services, and I thought I want to get back into it. So I had joined a service locally, and I was doing my ride-outs, and it was one of my former students that was my paramedic field training officer. And he was kind of nervous about having to check me off on stuff. And I said, well, you just do your job, and I'll do mine. And if you see I need to improve something, just let me know, because I don't know the way things are done here. And we went to one of our frequent flyers, and she definitely needed help. She lived in a very rundown, very dirty, clutter everywhere, probably mice and rats running around. But she had fallen, and she had crapped all over herself. And we went in there, and I was trying to assess her and talk to her and all that. And he's like, just put her in bed. Just put her back in bed. And he annoyed me, one, because of his attitude, and two, she needed help. Now, it was more help than I could provide on the ambulance. And she didn't want to go to the hospital. I asked him to go get me a towel, a couple of towels, and a bottle of water out of the truck. And he cussed at me and stormed off. And I don't know whatever happened. He never brought me the stuff, but I ended up finding some stuff in her kitchen to help her get herself cleaned up.
Wow. And
then I picked her up because my my preceptor had not come back in, and put her in the bed. And then he came in and said, you done now? And I said, no. I said, ma'am, I'm going to go get you some food. I'm going to get you some water. I'm going to leave it here in your nightstand so you don't have to get out of bed.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'm going to make sure your phone is right here by your bed. And I could just see his jugular veins distending and the one in his forehead popping out. And then I said, ma'am, I'm going to walk through your house and make sure this is as safe as it can be, because she had space heaters and things. So I was making sure we had the 3 feet clearance around. I maybe a little too much about, like rolling up the throw rugs and, checking
run to Lowe's and get me some grab bars to put in the,
yeah. But on the flip side, that's stuff that I would think a decent human would want to do for another human.
You would think.
And I know we get burned out, and I know we get tired of running to some of the same places over and over and over again for the same complaints. And I know she needed help. And I could not get her that help other than calling DHR later and saying, you need to check on her. She needs to be in a home. But just treating them like a decent person. And it hurt me to see that student that had come through my class, when they came through class, probably would have done all the things I did. And then a couple of years later was not that same caring person. And maybe they were just having a bad day, but I didn't last long after that.
Well, thank you for everything you did for her and all the other things I'm sure you've done for a lot of other people. But no, I guess I can see where I haven't had the experience yet of seeing a student that came through my class, actually out working somewhere. But I can see where that would be disappointing. I didn't teach you to do that.
That's the minority. I've had many, many more students that I will see them out, or I even stopped at a wreck this morning and see the crew come in and do a good job. And you're like, yes. And I see a lot more of that. So it's a minority. But I think in many things in life, we tend to remember the negatives more than the positives. So I could probably list 101 of my failures and maybe one of my successes. And I think that's human nature.
Yes.
And it's kind of the same thing with this. I can see the students who do poorly, and those tend to stick with me because it just hurts, versus the ones that do so well because that's kind of just expected. So overall, it's been a very positive thing. I don't want anyone to think that this has been negative or that most of our students are negative. Right. But I have had some, and it just tends to stick with me more. And then I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how I can make that better and teach that better. So my education philosophy or what I teach in class, if nothing else, changes a lot from seeing sometimes failures in my students and going, I need to address that.
That's a great way to look at that. Great way to turn a negative into a positive.
We try, but trying to change a culture from the outside is really hard. So I can put out what I think are great students, and most of my students, and I'm sure you see with interesting students, and you probably had it when you came out, you're all we call them green, and they're excited and they're thrilled. And then after a while, reality sort of sinks in and they can't change the world as much as they want, and they get a little beaten down. So how to change the culture of an ambulance service when I'm an educator. And I would like to think the cultures are hopefully getting better the more good students we put out. But sometimes it seems like it's a very long uphill battle.
Maybe we touched on this a little bit already, but is there any, as far as the actual field of EMS itself, are there any changes that have come or that are coming, you see coming, that you don't like, that you don't agree with?
So EMS is greatly struggling right now because of reimbursements. So until the federal government changes what they reimburse for Medicare, Medicaid, our ambulance services are not going to have a lot of money. So without that, they obviously can't pay their employees a whole lot, and they can't always buy new equipment and more trucks. And it's hard to draw people to a field thinking they'll make, as an EMT, 13 to 15 an hour, when the news talks about travel nurses making, like 120 an hour. And I know that's a very small minority of nurses. Most are not making anywhere close to that. Well, maybe you are. Is that typical with nursing? You making $300-400 an hour?
No. I'm going to say no.
So until we can change the payment model, there's a lot of things that aren't going to change. And we see a lot of ambulance services closing, and we see a lot of ambulance services that are struggling to fill shifts. So one of the things that happened during the pandemic is they kind of loosened the rules on who could be on an ambulance.
Okay. That's scary.
Yeah, a little bit. So we have many people that are working on ambulances that have simply an EVOC certificate, and they're the driver.
Sure.
But then they'll have an EMT. And if something more complicated comes in, they might call for a supervisor intercept, which is not a bad model. But when there's like one paramedic intercept for like an entire county, and then you have two calls at the same time, somebody's not getting that level of care. I know many of them nowadays are running advanced, and they will like put the patient on the monitor and then like use their own phone and take a picture of the screen and send it to the paramedic supervisor, who will then interpret it and send it back. And that just makes me nervous.
Yes.
Nothing against the advanced. It's just not their scope of practice, and I don't know if that's the best way. Alternatively, if they're not out there doing that, or if they're not going to put a truck out that doesn't have a paramedic on it, then there's just not a truck. So then we see response times going to an hour, hour and a half, and that's another issue. So I don't know. I guess it's better to have inexperienced, lower trained people out there than no one. But I really, really kind of worry about where EMS might be even in 5 years, because we're struggling some in this area. And this area has always been pretty well covered, but we're struggling. And I know there's areas that are a little more rural that sometimes just don't have an ambulance for a day or two. I know we see it in some of the rural hospitals that are closing down and reducing what they offer. Healthcare in general is struggling some.
And especially, that's happening on one side. And then on the other side, you have the big places that are also struggling. Like, we hear stories all the time of people going to the big ER and waiting for 12, 24 hours to get stuff done. Like, just crazy, overloaded.
I've had to take my dad in a couple of times with some COPD issues to one of our local hospitals. And so far, knock on wood, and we've only been a couple of times, the hospitals have gotten us like right in, right back. They were not overwhelmed. But I've talked to plenty of friends who said, I waited for 6 hours here. And it's interesting to hear them cuss the same hospital that we went to and got really good care. And then I worry. No, I don't worry. I appreciate the fact that sometimes when I walk in and they go, oh, hey, Todd. And I'm like, yeah, hey, I'm here with my, whoever. And they're like, oh, we'll get them right back. I'm like, thank you. I don't want to see this preferential treatment, but when it's one of your family members,
you're going to pull every string you possibly can. Yep, absolutely. That's why we don't treat our own family members, right? Because you're not objective. Student evaluations. I've ignored my evaluations almost for as long as I've been at Calhoun. And recently I said, I need to go back and look at what the students have written about me. And for the most part, it was good. And then I think it was just one student, took a whole lot of time to write out all the things that they did not like about me. And I'm not great at taking criticism anyway. And so it just like devastated me, So how do you, as an instructor, how do you respond to that? Or how do you deal with that?
I figure at the beginning, it was probably pretty hard because I want to think I'm like the best instructor ever for everybody. And that obviously is not going to be true. There's personality differences. There's going to be, and with my move to more active type learning and engaged type learning, there are a lot of people that come in here that just basically want to sit and take notes. And I had one that wrote a fairly extensive list of how I was a terrible teacher. And one of his points was I didn't read the book to them.
You just can't win, can you?
Yeah. And he made an accusation that since I never read the book to them, I obviously had never read the book. And no, I don't read the book to them, but I reference the book a lot. I don't necessarily reference it in class, but I use it when I'm creating my presentations or my activities, or I'll look something up in it. Same thing I expect them to do. So that one was so far negative, it became funny. It was probably the first time, though, I thought about like a libel, because he talked about personality and things like, obviously hate my job, I hate patients, I try to get students to fail. He's a threat to society. I mean, it was really...
What?
Yes, it was really, really negative. And I probably had a case for a libel slander thing because he then posted some of the stuff online.
Jeez.
Which I worry because I don't want people to think negatively of our school or our program. So that was probably the worst one I've ever gotten. And I think it was his learning style and my teaching styles and our personalities just did not. Now, we're cool to each other when we see each other on scenes and things because I'm not going to get into all that when I'm trying to deal with a patient, but it's always interesting running into somebody like that. Now, as far as other negative ones, again, probably at the beginning, I'm sure they bothered me more, but now I look at it, if somebody took the time to write something negative, there's obviously something that they didn't like a lot, because if they're going to take the time to write it, it must have really bothered them. I wish they'd come to me before the evaluation, so I could have tried to fix it sooner, but then can I use that to try to fix something for next time? So I look at it as more of a constructive criticism than just a criticism. They don't bother me anymore. I've got a thick enough skin now that when they say I'm an idiot or I say I'm a jerk or say I'm mean, I'm like, okay, whatever. I really like seeing the positive ones, but that's just an ego thing. Who doesn't like being told that they're good?
Maybe I'll get there eventually. I just kind of teach on the side. And I had a moment where I was like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Oh, no. Keep teaching. Keep sharing.
I went to the Dr. Hogan that it's over the nursing department over there. And she was so lovely about the whole situation. She pulled it up and read it and pretty much told me like, don't worry about it. It took me probably a good couple of months to process that, but I'm trying to look at it more now, like what you said, like trying to take in the points and see if there is anything that I can change and make different, because I want to learn and get better. I don't want to be the person who runs away just because I get one negative evaluation, but that's what I actually wanted to do.
Well, if it's any consolation, in my doctoral program, one of the small papers, not big paper, but the small papers I wrote was on student evaluations of faculty and whether they should be used for promotional consideration. And what the overwhelming evidence is that the majority of evaluations are pretty useless. There's just no correlation to how good an instructor. That's a really hard thing to define. What is a good instructor or an effective instructor? But there did not seem to be any sort of correlation between student evaluations and how well somebody taught.
Interesting.
Of course, that also means all my good ones probably didn't mean anything either.
No, it's only the bad ones that are meaningless. That's like vital signs. The good ones are always correct. The bad ones are always questionable. And two, you would think the student who would take the time to do all that is either incredibly motivated by rage or absolutely loves you.
Yes.
Because everybody else in the middle, like as a student, I don't know if I've ever written more than a couple of sentences on any evaluation ever, because I just don't want to mess with it. I'm
right.
just like, this is just more check boxes. All right, whatever. Excellent.
And that's how most of the evaluations are. They pick one line and go straight down it.
Yeah, that's what I've always done.
I remember the old paper ones that we used to have to do for every class that we taught, even a CPR class, and how many of them they'd have like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and somebody would just draw a straight line down one of them for all of the answers. And that was great if they picked the right number. If they didn't even look and suddenly you got all ones and that was the worst it could be, and then you have to explain why that student felt like they needed to give you all ones. I'm like, I don't know. I think he just put his pencil on the paper and drew a line.
The best student evaluation I ever saw was somebody, maybe in this very room that we're in right now, maybe in our intermediate class, I bet. I can't even remember the guy's name, but I read his evaluation of you and the other instructor. His evaluation was, Todd is awesome and couldn't teach somebody to pour piss out of a boot. Do you remember that?
No, I don't. Surprised I don't have that framed.
I guess I should say that we are recording in the EMS building at Northwest Shoals Community College. I started EMT school here 24 years ago.
You having flashbacks or something?
When I walked in the door, I sure did. I remember the feeling of like going in that restroom and being all super nervous about a test or a checkoff station or whatever. Yeah.
Well, you really impressed me as a student because you were going full-time to UNA and full-time here. And I thought you were absolutely nuts. But then you excelled, I think, at both places. Obviously, I don't know your UNA grades, but you excelled here. So somebody that could pull off going to school full-time in two places and get the grades you did, that was amazing. You really impressed me.
Thank you very much. I'm surprised that you remember that.
Well, I think I've only had 2 or 3 other people that have even attempted that. But they all seem to have been the overachievers, the ones that really have it together. They know how to study. They know how to time management. They don't have a whole lot of extra distractions. And that's something that's definitely different now than maybe back when I first started, is almost all my students have at least a full-time job. And then like advanced and paramedic students, they all work in the field. And it draws us in. It sucks us in. We love doing it, and we love taking care of people, and we're part of a team, and we get a real sense of accomplishment at the end of the shift because you got to help people. So I understand the almost addiction that this gives us. But then when you're faced with, I need you to hold over for 4 hours. Well, I got class. If you don't, then we're going to be short a truck, and you don't want to let your team down. So then they do it, but then they don't come to class, and then, of course, their grades suffer. So they're put in a hard spot. I don't like to advise students to go to work, at least in EMS, and then come to school because that's hard. I'd rather them go work at Target or something.
I'm in awe of a lot of the nursing students because almost every one of them, it seems like, not only have a full-time job, but have a family, they're single parents, or they're taking care of their parents who have dementia, or there's always these unbelievable stories that you hear. It's like, how are you? I wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. Like, how are you doing this and that at the same time? Like you said, I didn't have anything else going on. I was a full-time college student, and I was on a scholarship over there, so I didn't have to work, and I didn't have anything else to do.
When I went to paramedic school, our paramedic program was set up around a 24-48 schedule. So I work my 24 hours and then go to school for 10 days and then work 24 hours and then go to school a day typically. So it's usually 3 days of school, 2 days of work. So the only time we had any time off was on weekends. And our days changed. So if you worked Monday, Thursday, you had class on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. So it was flexible that way as long as you're in the right shift. But there was 21 of us that started paramedic class, and almost all of us finished. But we all worked that same schedule. So I still was able to work full-time and go to school. Now, I couldn't have done anything else.
Right. That's intense.
And then when clinicals started, that got really hairy. I was lucky that way back in the day, my paramedic partner was able to serve as my preceptor. So when I was on the ambulance working, we could do skills. So I never really had to do many ambulance ride-outs, but it was all the OR and ICU and CCU and OB and PEDS and the burn center and the trauma center and all that. But there's many times work at 24, come in for 8 hours of class, and then either 12 hours of clinicals afterwards or something like that, and then sleep for a couple hours and come back. And with everything that students have nowadays on top, I don't know if I could have done that. So I try not to judge them about not coming to school too much because I understand, but also if you don't come to school, then it's really hard to give you a good grade.
Yes, or it's hard to be sympathetic at the end when they need an extra point or whatever.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of not requiring people to come to class, especially adults in that situation. I mean, if you can listen to the recorded lecture or tune in online or study the textbook and not pay attention to the lectures, great. If you can do great that way, fine.
I like the idea of hybrid programs. I think those are great. Just so there's more flexibility for the student, because I know I fixed my furnace, I fixed my car, I fixed my washer, while by watching YouTube. Mm-hmm. So if I can figure out how to fix some of those pretty complicated things, I think I can learn a lot about EMS if I can find the right information online, which is what coming to class helps you do. So a lot of times I say I sort of guide you. I provide the resources. This is the stuff that we need to cover so you can learn what you need to learn, and this is good, reliable information. It's not somebody that you saw on TikTok that may or may not be right. So I think that's an important role of a teacher is to be kind of the gatekeeper of the good information. But if they could do that on their own and then come in and do well in the skills, but that takes a fairly motivated student. And I think most of my students are not. Of course, I have some students that come here the first day and they don't own a computer. They don't know how to turn one on. We go through so much professional development. For years, we were told about these digital natives and all that. What we were not told is that many people skipped over computers and just went to cell phones. So yes, they were digital natives. They were raised on the internet has always been there for them, but it's always been on their phone. So when I'm trying to get them to write a paper and they're trying to type it out on their phone,
wow,
it is not working. I said, well, use Word on the computer. And they're like, well, I don't have one. Like, you don't have a computer? And that to me, that just blows my mind. But a lot of them don't.
Yeah, I still think of the computer as being the backbone.
Yes.
This is what you use to do work. The phone's like what you use if you don't have anything else. Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting.
A lot of them, especially right out of high school, they use the Chromebook through school. So they're used to a Chromebook, but anything else that's not Chromebook, they can't operate.
Wow. Wouldn't have thought of that.
So the hybrid is a good tool for the right student.
For people who are interested in the EMS field, going into it, or people who are already in it, wanting to go into education, what advice would you give to people?
Well, if you want to get into the EMS field, I think in medicine in general, the EMS field is a great place to start. EMT being just one semester. It's a great way to get your feet wet for medical. You learn a lot in EMS, especially about how to assess a patient and how to work with people. And then I know like our other health studies programs always give extra points on their application. So like nursing, you get extra points on it if you're already an EMT. And I know many like PA and med schools get extra points for EMTs. So it's a good incentive. And that's part of why I got into it. I was going to go to med school. So come try it one semester. It's good. It is a short time, just one semester. You can make it. You have to put all that other stuff aside for a little bit. But that goes for any program. I think if you're going to dedicate yourself to go to school, you need to let your family know, you need to let your job know that you've picked this up and it's going to take a considerable amount of time. What I don't think many students probably realize is just how much out of school time. So the old adage has been for every hour you spend in the classroom, you should spend 1 or 2 hours outside. So if the EMT is basically about 12 hours a week in the classroom, you should spend anywhere from 12 to 24 hours a week outside, learning and doing the extra activities and the readings and all that. So now you're looking at that 12 hours in the classroom, 12 hours outside minimum, so a minimum of 24 hours a week. And that's at least a half-time job. And then if you need to spend more time, you start getting close to it being a full-time position. But it's only a semester. So for 12 weeks in the summer or 16 weeks in the spring or fall, you can do that. There's no real prereqs for any of this. So really just somebody that's motivated and interested. You have to have an interest in medicine. It is not a first aid class. So don't take this stuff thinking I'm just going to go do first aid or I want to learn first aid. We have first aid classes for you. This is somebody that is much more interested in medicine. My interest are the fun stuff I do through scouting and still the amount of time I spend out in the woods hiking and all that. Having the EMT has been really, really beneficial just because things happen. It's been a great comfort to me knowing that I have that knowledge. We had tornadoes come through here, not last night, night before.
A couple nights ago, yeah.
Yeah, and if that hits my neighborhood, I know that at the very least I can take care of me and my family, and I can go take care of my neighbors if needed. Having that knowledge is kind of cool. It's probably more knowledge than the average individual needs, but it's really cool knowledge.
You have the wilderness ALS and wilderness first. You've done all that too, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, those are some fun classes. The first one I took was in Michigan at the very tail end of November. And our final scenario was a tornado, supposedly, that hit a camp. And I can remember it was 28 degrees or something. And I was wading out into this creek and river to save someone that we'd found in there. I'm thinking, this is cold. And I'm from Wisconsin, but I'm like, I know better than to go wading when it's below freezing. This is dumb. That was part of it. And so I jumped in there and did it. But it was a lot of fun. We had a good time with that. A lot of good knowledge. Trying to take medicine and apply it when you don't maybe have an ambulance and help is maybe 12, 24, 36 hours away. Because it's a different mindset. We had another one that they put on at Birmingham, and they did it at Ruffner Mountain. And we didn't camp there, but all the stuff was outside. And it was set up through the School of Medicine, and I really think they were trying to get some physicians involved. And a few of us paramedics, there was maybe three or four of us that took the class with all these physicians. And that's always a little intimidating when you come in as a paramedic thinking wow, these are all doctors. They all have all this knowledge. These are the ones we go to when we have questions and getting to meet all these people. And then they turned us loose on these scenarios out in the woods. And how many of the doctors were like, I guess we need to. And I'm like, you need to look for that tree up there that's going to fall, or that branch, or there's lightning, so we need to move, and how they're not used to operating outside of their setting. And it was the us paramedics kind of brag a little bit, but we really excelled with that. I think much more than the School of Medicine thought we were going to do, because they were a little hesitant to let us in. But we really showed them that we work well in that kind of disaster, out of hospital medicine, and the doctors did not. They were great with the medicine, but things like, we need to move them down the mountain. They'd never done anything like that.
Right.
And we move patients every day.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody in EMS has a tale of the, gynecologist or dentist running up to the scene and thinking they have to take over.
Although I did have anesthesiologist on a scene where a guy had shot himself in his head, but he wasn't dead. So we were trying to keep him alive, and he needed an airway. And he said, hey, I the chief anesthesiologist at this hospital, can I help? And I'm like,
so glad to see you.
Yeah, you got that airway. Here's my intubation equipment. You go for it.
What can I do to help you?
Yeah.
Yes.
But that was one of the few times I've had a physician that was really specialized in what I needed at that moment. You're right. Most of the time they're kind of like, I am one, but this is not. And I get it.
Sure.
I appreciate that they want to help, though.
Oh, absolutely. Right. As long as they have a good attitude about
it.
Yes. Here in Alabama, we just had this bill passed that is sort of anti-DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And there's this movement where the politicians, the legislature, I feel, is trying to control what teachers are able to say in the classroom. And I feel that spreading more across the country, and it's kind of a thing happening right now. So if you're comfortable talking about it, I did just want to ask, as an educator, how has that affected you, or how do you feel about that?
In some respects, I'm glad I teach at the college level, because most of this doesn't directly impact us at the college. Although I believe there was a law passed in the last day or so that we have to make sure our bathrooms are labeled for gender assigned at birth. Not anything else, just had to be labeled that way. If you have I don't remember the law exactly, but anyways, if you have multiple stalls in a bathroom, you have to make sure it's a certain gender assigned. I try not to have any bias. I understand as a white, heterosexual, cisgender male, obviously I do. And my upbringing probably is reflected in some things, but I try to be as Christian as I can all the time. And the number one thing I kind of remember is to love God and love your neighbor. So I try to love people regardless of whatever their opinions are on things, or whatever their beliefs or all that. And if two people can come together and love each other and enjoy each other, then that's awesome. If it's two males, if it's two females, if it's a male and a female, if they all come together and can love and want to spend their life together and share their lives together, I think that's awesome. So I've not tried to ever have any of that, but realize I am coming from one side of this. I worry more that the government is trying to regulate some of our speech, and that concerns me that we might be starting down a slippery slope with this. On the flip side, as a parent, when my kids were first grade, second grade, third grade, I would not want the teacher just really discussing anything sexual with them because I think that would be very inappropriate with someone that age. But if one of the kids' classmates had two moms or two dads and somebody in the class asked the teacher about it, I feel the teacher should, in an age-appropriate way, to say, well, that's just their family and that's acceptable and that's fine. And they don't need to get into all the rest of it. They'll figure that out later. But there are many things that we, especially medicine, that we kind of have to understand a bit of a gender for. And 12 leads is one of them, because when I put put all the stickers on someone and I go to put the information in for the interpretation, I had to put male or female. I don't have another option. And the way our rep asked is, what was the gender of the heart? Is how she said to try to approach that, because I have to put a gender in. And then there's some things, and this goes not just for somebody who maybe has changed or transitioned, but gone through some other surgery. Like if you don't have an ovary at all, I don't need to worry about ectopic pregnancy too much. So there are some things that medically having at least certain organs is important to me. I remember there was an incident where they were trying to pin down, I think it was a Democratic or a couple of the Democrats, about what is gender and what's a male versus the female. And, for most people, that's not a huge issue, but there is a small number of people out there that maybe are born with different chromosomes, some that are born with both sex organs, and how do we classify them? And I don't have any answers for that. That's not something I've spent a whole lot of time trying to hash out, other than a little bit in my own mind and my own personal beliefs, but that's just my personal beliefs. As long as I teach my students to take care of people and to love their patients and to provide the best patient care they can regardless, that's what we should do. Not so much a gender issue, but a call I ran that I use as an example for this is there was a call we pulled up, but it was a nice house. We had a hard time parking because there was a fire engine, and this was like 11, 12 o'clock at night. So we expect a fire engine there, and there were several squad cars there, which set flags off for me. Like when you have a lot of police on scene, you worry about safety issues. But then like the chief of police vehicle was there and the fire chief's vehicle was there. And I just really get to wondering. And so I opened up the door and we're going in, and the fire department met us and picked up the stretcher and carried it in. And I thought, that's odd. They've never done that. So I have this guy who's gray and sweaty and looks like he's having the big one. He's holding his chest, and we're doing all of our stuff for an MI. And sure enough, the STEMI and the 12 lead and all that, and we get him in the ambulance. And they put him on the stretcher and then picked the stretcher up and carried him out. The stretcher never touched the floor. I'm thinking, this is so weird. And we get to the hospital, and we drop him off, and going back to our station, my partner's like, do you know who that was? I'm like, not a clue. Well, that was like the city council, the head city council person for that district. So, of course, he controls the budget for the fire department and police department, and they were all going to be there to show how much they cared about their citizens. I'm like, you know what? I picked up somebody 2 days ago that was in a ditch, and none of you guys were here. So we don't always treat people the same.
It's a great point.
And we should, regardless of any of it. Again, treat the patients like you would want to be treated, or your parents or your family, you want them to be treated, and that's how we should handle that. I worry that one of these days I will be a little bit more regulated in what I'm allowed to talk about in the college classroom. I know there are college professors that have been suspended recently for their views on like the Palestine and Israeli stuff. And I try to do my best to keep my head down and not say anything too divisive or anything that's going to get me fired. I have my personal beliefs on it, and I try to keep those to myself. But sometimes this stuff comes up in classrooms, and we do have to discuss about it. And I try to remain as neutral as I can, and always fall back on the do what's right for the patient.
Well, I thought the point of going to college was to expand your view and hear different things and learn and grow. And it seems crazy that you would want to limit what people are allowed to talk about in a college classroom. I agree. It's certainly different for the elementary school students.
Yes.
I'm married to a teacher. Not that I know what it's like to be a teacher, but I think I can pretty confidently say that the teachers are not out there with any kind of agenda trying to indoctrinate. Like, all that is just fear-mongering. It's crazy. They want the kids to do well. They love the kids. And things come up, They deal with all kinds of issues outside of the realm of reading, writing, arithmetic. I think a lot of that is based on this premise that the right creates that there are these wacko left-wing teachers out there who are looking to put this stuff in the minds of young children. And I just cannot imagine that is true. I think the whole premise of that is just BS.
I don't remember back to my elementary school days. Of course, that goes back, 40, 50 years ago now, that there was a whole lot of any of that. But that was also a very different culture, different time than we have today, and things were not as open. Something that really opened my eyes to that is something that happened to me in college, talking about expanding your views. So I know it's hard to tell by looking at me now, but I used to, I ran cross country through high school. And when I got out of high school and started college, I actually turned, semi-pro. I made a little bit of money, never enough that I was going to be a full-time runner or anything or get huge sponsors. I had little sponsors. But there was a race Saturday or Sunday for the YMCA. And if you looked at the symbol on our shirt, it had a big upside down pink triangle within the other half of the Y. And it was Y. And then if you read the fine print at the bottom, not run. So it was there was the race shirt, but it was a big upside down pink triangle. And I didn't think anything of it. It was a cool pink and a cool blue. I liked the shirt. So Monday morning I was going to wear it, and I wore it to college. And several women that were in my classes that would never looked at me a lot that day. And I was like, oh yeah. And then I had guys come up and talk to me and like put their arm around me and say things to me that were just kind of caught me a little bit off. And then I had some that were look at me with disgust. And I had one guy that spit on me.
What?
And I couldn't figure out what in the world. And he made some very inappropriate comments I'm not going to say on the podcast, but basically get my back in the closet and all that. I'm like, and I just could not figure out what was going on. So I got the college had a newspaper, and on the front page, it was the 10% Society, which I don't know if they're around anymore, but that was a big thing at this university. And it was a big university. I mean, we had 45,000 undergraduates and about 15,000 graduate students. So, 60,000 students. And they claim that 10% of males were homosexual. So that was the 10% Society. But they were having a big rally that day. And what was their symbol? An upside down pink triangle.
I see.
So I wore that shirt to try to support the YMCA and the race. And everybody thought I was part of that rally. But it was a very interesting exposure to what happens to a minority group and how they can be treated for something so, in my mind, minor and really not important to me. If somebody is nice and kind and friendly, then I'll get along with them and we'll be friends. If they're a jerk, they're a jerk. And that goes for any group. But it was a very interesting exposure. And in hindsight, I'm glad I had that because I think it's made me a little more compassionate or empathetic for some of our minority groups. So I try to expand. I always tell that story to my students about how we need to be aware of our biases and we can't always even identify them that we know or even know that we're doing them, but to treat everybody kindly.
That's another one of my kind of pet things. I'm very interested in bias in medicine and how that affects how we deal with patients and each other and stuff.
I know it does. I know I've probably done it too without even realizing it, as much as I try not to.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is to just acknowledge we have bias, just as humans. I think we all do. But I think we just have to recognize it, correct for it.
Yeah, do the best we can.
When I came through training here, it was a bunch of white guys. There were a couple of females, I think. I think all the instructors were male.
Yep.
Is that still pretty much true? Or what's the spread? I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
We're a very, I'm not sure the word either, concentrated group. That's not quite right.
Homogeneous.
We're not very, homogeneous. That's the word.
Right.
Thank you. So we're a very homogeneous group. Again, our department is 3 white guys, all cisgendered, heterosexual. We have tried, I don't know if tried is the right word. Well, we have discussed a lot about how to try to get more minority students, primarily African-American and Hispanic, because we have a fairly large population here and they are not represented in EMS. And we can all point to the 1 or 2 that we've had come through. And behind closed doors, when we do have a minority come in, we really are hoping they're going to be successful. And we try to do everything we can. And when they decide to drop out or this isn't for them, then we feel really like we've let them down somehow. And we've let down the profession some. This was something that National Registry or somebody had done a study on using National Registry data about how I think Hispanics were the second largest group of EMTs and paramedics at like 5%, 7%.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So greatly underrepresented across the nation in this field. And we don't know how to change that. I don't know if there's something culturally that doesn't make them as interested in working in EMS, or maybe they just don't even know that this is a career opportunity. But we would love to have more of them. But then when you come look at our department, we are very homogeneous. I do see a lot more females in our classes now than we used to. And I have worked in places where it's been about 50-50, which is good to see. I've always felt that a male-female mix on a crew was important because there are some calls, rapes and OBs and stuff, that just, it's much better handled by a female. The patient is much more comfortable. I used to work with the only female at night in our county, and we got a lot of calls directed just towards us because something about it, the patient sounded like they needed a female, and we would go. And it's one of the few times, because she was an EMT, I was a paramedic, so in theory, I'm supposed to ride in the back of the patient all the time. The highest level of care is supposed to be with the patient. But if it was something I did not need to do any ALS skills, a lot of times she was the one that rode with the patient because that's what was best for the patient. Of course, I didn't get as much sleep as some of the other crews, but but it's always with a good mix. And as far as the LGBTQ, I'm seeing more in our classes, which is good because again, that's a group that I don't want to say I have a hard time relating with, but I don't have their background because that's not my background. So I'm always worried or nervous that I'm going to offend or say or do something inappropriate, not intentionally, but just without even realizing. And I don't think I do because I've never had any students complain about it. So hopefully I don't. I've worked with some that definitely had some bias against gays. And that always bothered me because, again, I really feel we should love people and take care of our patients and all that. And I've had a few patients, both males and females, that have made a pass at me in the ambulance. One of those rescue hero type things, which normally the firefighters get. We don't get it much in the ambulance. So I know some people that were greatly offended that they were hit on by a male. Really? And I'm like, if anybody out there ever thought I was attractive, I'll take that as a compliment.
Sure.
And I just simply say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested, and, or whatever. And then they tend to almost get a little defensive or a little scared, I think, that they may have misinterpreted something. And I know there has to be a fear among gay and lesbian that going out or being out, or they have to have some courage to take that step to hit on somebody that they don't know.
Oh, yeah.
So I've always appreciated that level of courage it took for them to do that. And I'm not going to try to slam them or anything. No.
I hope everybody would take that as a compliment. I mean, you could argue that in that situation, it's inappropriate regardless of...
Well, yeah, it is inappropriate, but...
I'm taking care of you, I'm not your...
When they slide me their phone number or something, I'm like, no, whatever's on the patient care report, just right here. Is that right? Okay, good. You can have that back.
I don't know if I ever had that experience. But no, I mean, I can tell you as a gay guy, like I would not just randomly hit on somebody without knowing for sure that they're gay. But yeah, going back to the racial diversity kind of situation, there was a black female EMT student riding with me one time on the ambulance over in Florence, and she stuck her head up in between the seats and she said something to the effect of, I thought this must pay a lot because all these white people do it, but that clearly is not the case. I thought that was so funny.
Yep, definitely not the case. I don't think there's too many really wealthy EMTs and paramedics out there, but we don't do it for that. We do it because of the difference we make and knowing that we get to help people. That's really the gist of it.
There was a student a couple of semesters ago, maybe last year, 2 years ago. She was from somewhere else and she was having trouble in the program. And one of the things that she cited was she thought there might have been a language barrier, like reading the test questions. And I thought there must be some mechanism to address this. Like surely we can get a translation of the test or we can allow her to Google Translate. I pushed for that. Like I tried to advocate for that and I ran up against a wall. They were like, no, absolutely not. Don't care. I got nothing from anybody. I was disappointed by that.
That is surprising because colleges kind of try to hold themselves up as being accepting and diverse and wanting to help students and do all that we can to help them. And I understand that English not being your native tongue might make working like in a high stress situation, ICU, CCU, could be challenging, but I think that's something that student could overcome very easily.
I don't think that should be a barrier to your education.
No. And they may not even stay around here. They may go somewhere else. They may go to a different country that speaks a different language.
That particular student failed out of the program or dropped, I don't know, and then came back the next year and aced it, did great.
Oh, good.
And she, just talking to her, she said, yeah, I just wasn't getting any sleep.
Oh.
So it turned out fine. But
okay.
I just was absolutely shocked. And at that time, we were using the HESI standardized exams. And I thought, well, surely to God, you can just call HESI and get it in a different language. And they were like, no, we don't do that.
Well, it wasn't all that long ago that our national registry started having ADA policies. Because at one point, if you had to have the test read to you or something, you were just out of luck. But they have some options now. I think technology has helped with that. So they can use some of the screen readers and things to take it, which really helps with people with dyslexia.
I'm sure we all know people who are fantastic healthcare workers, providers, whatever their role is, who are not that great at taking tests.
Oh, yes.
You were talking about the technology earlier. There's a student that just failed out of our program this semester that hands down the best nurse in the class. Like everybody's like, we want her to take care of us, but she can't do the technology stuff, And I hate that is a barrier for keeping good people out of the workforce or out of whatever role they want to go into.
Yes and no, because like I'd mentioned, students that are very good with being able to do anything they want on their phone, but not know how to check an email or how to use a computer really. But where in our career in medicine are we not using a computer at some point?
That's a great point.
We still have to do patient care reports at the end, and that's almost all tablet or computer based. And our dispatch information comes in on tablets nowadays for the most part, or our phones. And continuing education, with almost all of it being online nowadays, they have to learn how to do those things. Now, I feel we should have some sort of mechanism in place where we can teach people how to do that, and not just that they struggle so much with the technology that they fail. We need to teach them how to use the technology because it's here to stay. It's not like we're going back.
Sure.
And then when we get into AI and stuff like that, that's going to be a whole nother thing that we'll have to start teaching people how to use properly.
But yes, that's a great point. And that's kind of something that's come up among the other instructors when we've been talking about this particular student, like exactly what you said, like where are you going to go that you don't have to use a computer? Yeah. The AI thing's very exciting. Do you listen to Curbsiders podcast at all?
I do not, but I'll start.
It's great. It's
okay.
It's internal medicine.
Okay.
It's not emergency focused, but it's fantastic. Like I swear I've learned more from them than, anybody except you.
I know that's not true. It's getting a little deep. Time to put on some waders.
But one of the ads they've been running recently is for this computer program that claims it's an AI program that claims to just listen to your conversation with the patient and then write the note.
How cool.
Yeah.
And if I was a scribe, I'd be really nervous right now.
Sure. Right. And they even say, like, it's just like a human scribe. It learns your style over time. And the pitch is your charting is done before the patient even walks out of the room, which sounds too good to be true to me. But who knows? Maybe we'll get there.
Well, I'm going to one-up you because this is something that my son is working on with his company.
Yes, please.
So they have a program in place, and they're still hammering out some of the details. That basically there's a camera either in the top of the ambulance or in the emergency department that's looking down on the patient. And if I take a blood pressure in the right arm at this time, it will record it because it can recognize the blood pressure.
All right.
Now, that's not a big deal because our monitor has that. If I start an IV, it'll recognize the color of the catheter.
Wow.
Where you inserted it, what vein that is, and then document it.
Wow.
And if you don't attach the fluid to it, it'll mark it as a missed IV attempt. If I then pull out, let's say, epinephrine, it'll recognize the epinephrine from the syringe. It'll read it and how much of the syringe you push for the dose.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is neat to see it. It's, of course, when we turn it loose or when they turn it loose in the wild, I don't know how well that will work. I'm sure there'll be some things to work on. But I can't imagine a camera being above me just recording everything I do in the back of the ambulance and the time and the doses I gave. And then when I get back, it's all just there on my patient care report.
That would be amazing.
Yes.
Great for QA.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm. You just blew my mind. I don't know what to say. That thinking about artificial intelligence being used that way is really exciting.
Yes.
That doesn't sound scary. That sounds exciting.
It sounds exciting to me because my patient care report just got real easy.
Right. Exactly. Anything else on your mind? Anything else you wanted to cover? What didn't I ask you that I should have asked you?
The last one here, I didn't even notice until I printed this out earlier. Obviously, you never sit still. What's next?
I just added that today.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm like, I don't remember that from last night. That's an interesting question. And I think all EMS providers should be thinking about kind of what's next, if nothing else, the next call and how to prepare for it and reviewing their medicine and reviewing their books and reading, maybe not their textbooks, because most textbooks are kind of out of date, but trying to stay up to date with the latest information, not just like read the protocol manual, but what things are changing and coming. So always reading and learning and updating. I'm not a critical care paramedic. I don't like to think there's a level above me that I haven't achieved. And that's an ego thing. So I might do that one day. But really, I kind of feel like I've got to the point in my life where I don't want to say I'm coasting because I'm definitely not coasting. I still stay very active and stuff here in college, but I don't have any aspirations of earning like another doctorate or doing a career change and becoming a physician or something like that. At this point in my life, I've got 7 grandkids, so I'm ready to kind of just enjoy things. I'm ready to look forward to maybe sitting still a little.
If people are interested in learning about the EMS department here at Northwest Shells Community College or interested in contacting you, how can people get in touch?
We have lots of ways. Easiest thing is probably to find us on the website, nwscc.edu. You can always call our department or you can call me, email us. I do have a YouTube channel that I guess you can contact me through that, and that's just Medic Todd.
All right. Well, Dr. Todd Oyen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for this. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, that does it for this episode of Knowledgeable Provider. I'm your host, Jody Marks. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your preferred listening platform. Give us a nice 5-star rating and leave a nice review. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/knowledgeableprovider. And as always, stay safe, take care of yourself, and take care of your patients in that order.